Hi. Welcome. I'm so thrilled to see so many. To see so many. Hooray. Thank you all for coming. And boy, this is our very first. And boy, we're starting off with a wonderful, wonderful speaker, Miss Sue Gillis. She is the queen of Boca. She really does. She knows so much about everything. And today, she's going to be talking about what happened in Broward County during World War II. You know, sometimes people only think of us as way back or now. But, you know, it's like a sandwich. The good stuff is in the middle. So I know you'll love it, and I hope to see each and every one of you at each and every one of our meetings. They're going to be wonderful. They're going to be wonderful. And so, without further ado, my good friend, Miss Sue Gillis.
Thank you. Well, pleasure to be here today. And if you don't know who I am a local historian, but I am the curator at the Schmidt Boca Raton History Museum. You heard that right, Sally? Okay. We have a new name. Hello. And for 19 years, and before that, I was for 15 years with the Fort Lauderdale Historical Society. I have done many exhibitions, articles, even books about the topic of World War II in our part of the world, and I thought it would be interesting to combine that and kind of share that with you, which is obviously, you will see, is a kind of never-ending topic. There's always new resources. Now, I apologize in advance. This is a long talk. It's like almost an hour. So if you're going to fall asleep, make sure you're in the back of the room. That's all I ask. But I think you will see why, because there's so many topics to cover. And so, next slide, please. 1940s, Fort Lauderdale is the center of Broward County, as it is technically today. And downtown Fort Lauderdale really was a downtown. So we all remember what that's like. Andrews Avenue really was a downtown Fort Lauderdale. There were all kinds of retail establishments and eateries. These are two postcards of Andrews in the block south of the southeast-southwest 2nd Avenue intersection. That's where today Main Library, the Government Center are. The view on the left is looking south, the west side of the street, towards the Sweet Building, which was the skyscraper in town, and it was near the New River Bridge. The other view is looking north along that same block, again the west side, and you will notice McCrory's sits in the middle of both those pictures, so that's why I included that. The building still stands, knock on wood. Okay, next slide. Things get very exciting actually in 1939 when a really interesting incident happened at Port Everglades. And my good friend, Mr. Gene Hyde, who has passed since, took these amazing photographs of an international incident. We are not at war. The British cruiser Orion chases a German freighter, not a military vessel, the Arauca, into Port Everglades, where she is granted sanctuary. Next. And when she comes into port, the ship is seized on the pretense of liens against the Hamburg American line. Don't ask me to explain. So the crew, which is about 30 guys, I think, very small crew, are free to come and go, but they can't go anywhere because their ship is stuck in port. So the Arauca becomes a tourist attraction for the next couple of years. And my family, who were Miamians, Miami, as they said, would come up to gawk at the poor Germans. Meanwhile, we know that the port commissioners befriended the crew and the captain, would give them Christmas parties, make sure they were taken care of. So that was all well and good until, next slide, 1941. Now, a little background. FDR, you can see him in the upper left. He was a regular visitor to the port because he would dock his yacht, the Potomac, there and go sports fishing. That's a picture of Fort Lauderdale commissioners giving him, no, it is not a rifle. It is a fishing pole. I had to do a lot of research to find that out, by the way. A fishing pole. In April of 41, we are not at war yet, he declares the seizure of all German ships in port. So the Coast Guard comes, and takes the crew, and you can see they're in civilian uniform, marches them uptown to the Broward County Courthouse, which stood where the Broward County Courthouse stands today, and puts them in the jail cells that were in the tower of the courthouse. And Jean took some photos of them, and they all have their backs, turned to the camera. That was very embarrassing for them. Shortly thereafter, they are sent to Ellis Island, which apparently was a very large internment camp for the duration of the war. They were not POWs, and they're repatriated at the end of the war. The port commissioners made every effort to contact the captain and the crew so they could send them care packages, because things were very bad in Germany, of course, after the war, but with no success. The Arauca was actually outfitted as a U.S. ship, but it met an untimely end shortly thereafter. The point of the story is all our locals realized, yes, war is imminent, and yes, we are involved. Next slide. So sure enough, Pearl Harbor happens, the U.S. enters the war. First, we're going to talk a little bit about war on the home front. Operation Drumbeat is in effect. This is German U-boats attacking merchant shipping all off the Atlantic coast and in the Gulf of Mexico. During 42, 24 ships were sunk off Florida, 16 between Cape Canaveral and Fort Lauderdale. Our local citizens are eyewitnesses. They can hear explosions. They can see and smell smoke. They see flotsam and sometimes bodies come ashore. Next. I have two friends, Martha and Peter Barrett. They're in their 80s today. They were little kids during the war, and they lived on Boca Raton Beach at the Boca Raton Villas. They were tourist cottages. They were witnesses to this. This can of Maxwell House coffee came off of the galley of one of those ships, floated ashore, still sealed, still good to the last drop. And of course, coffee was rationed at the time. Peter, who apparently has some kind of hoarding instinct, thank goodness, kept the most amazing artifacts like his little toys and all sorts of things from his time in Boca Raton, and he's very generously donated those to my agency 15 years ago. And he's always finding things for me. He always has a wonderful memory. It's just amazing. In addition, Granddad Barrett kept this little ledger, and it's very amazing. 5442, ship torpedoed off Boynton, one off Delray, one off Deerfield. 56, one off Boca Raton. 57, one off Boca Raton. 59, two off Boca Raton, big fire. 514, one south of Lauderdale, 1:30 a.m. Wow.
Those were German subs that sank?
Yes.
That hit
yes, all kinds of ships. Because they're trying to destroy the supply line to Europe. This was terrifying. Now, there are legends in every community on the east coast of the U.S., or used to be, and the story goes like this. They found an abandoned German sub, and on board was a Miami Herald and a wholesome bread wrapper. And it just changes, as you go up the coast. And so I've got to tell you, frankly, most professional American historians discount these stories because they're always second, third, fourth hand, and these days a lot further information. There don't seem to be any official records with the FBI or the military, with two very important exceptions. A crew did come ashore in Long Island, and one at Ponte Vedra, which is near Jacksonville, with the purposes of sabotage. Now, that was not the purpose of Operation Drumbeat. They weren't here to attack us. Did we know that? No. So the possibility was very real and absolutely terrifying. And you know that most American citizens today have no idea that the war was right offshore. Next slide. Now, we have two civilian responses to this, because you got to remember at the time, Pearl Harbor had decimated our Navy. So we're trying to build up our Navy and our naval forces, and so civilians actually step into the breach, at least for a while. One is the Coast Guard Auxiliary. So these are gentlemen who are a little too old for service, but they have a boat and a firearm. And Flotilla Number 2, which was our guys in Broward County, they patrolled the water from Hallandale to Boynton Beach. in the intercoastal offshore. They are looking for submarine activities, landing parties, survivors, and what have you. This photo is flotilla number 3, which is the West Palm crowd. I'm sorry, I just don't have a picture of my other guys. Someday I might, but you get the idea. They were called very disrespectfully by the Coast Guard, the Hooligans Navy and the Mosquito Fleet. And these are names they bore proudly. Next slide. We also have the Civil Air Patrol. Civil Air Patrol is formed in 1941, originally with the Civilian Defense Forces, but later transferred toward the War Department. Same thing, these are gentlemen too old for air service, but they have pilot's license and they have planes. And this is long before, today we think of them as cadets and learning to fly and so on. No, these guys were on coastal patrol, looking for subs, landing, survivors. In one famous incident near Cape Canaveral, one of the pilots spotted a U-boat that was on a sandbar. And he circled and circled, and he called the Navy. The Navy's sending a ship, I think it was from Jacksonville. It takes them so darn long to get there. Of course, the sub escaped when the tides rose, okay? Hap Arnold, head of the Air Forces, was so angry with this, he made sure that these CAP pilots are outfitted with the bombs on the bottom of their plane. And between that bomb and the tarmac, there's a hand span. So you had to be very competent and confident to fly one of these aircraft. I don't know, I'm not sure whether any of the bombs were either deployed or not, but we do know that the U-boat captains and the crew, they did not know whether the little aircraft were armed or not, so they were very frightened and they would always dive as soon as they saw one. Next. There he goes. I love the graphic. Next slide, Pop. Now let's talk a little bit of hometown heroes. We know every community in Broward County contributed men and women who served during the war. Outside our Oakland Park post office there on the right, we had a big sign that listed all the men and women in service. And Oakland Park wasn't very big back then, but it's still obviously a lot of young people in service. The big one is from Hollywood. That's the Hollywood Honor Roll. Next. So let's meet just a couple of our hometown heroes. Sandy Nineteers is a Fort Lauderdale lad, went to high school in Fort Lauderdale. West Point, he was already in the military before the war started. He was killed in very valiant conditions, horrible conditions in Baton, for which he was awarded the Medal of Honor. There is a statue to him on Riverwalk in Fort Lauderdale, and of course Nineteer Drive outside War Memorial Auditorium is named for Sandy. Next. Okay, here's some other guys. My buddy Mr. Dave Ash, he's a Deerfield Boca boy. Now he's the guy on the right, handsome guy on the right. He grew up on a houseboat in the middle of the Hillsborough Canal because his father was the bridge tender for the federal highway bridge that divides the two counties. So he went to school in Deerfield, but most of his life has been in Boca Raton. He was Naval Air. Earl and Cliff Tucker are posed there with their mom Elizabeth in Oakland Park. Mary Nunez Tanike is a WAC from Hollywood. And John Perry Mickle is from a famous Wilton Manors family, and he was a sailor. Next slide. Now, amongst all my photos of Broward, I have no images of black soldiers, and I knew they existed. I knew they were serving in Broward, and I knew they were from Broward. Now, what I found was the Fort Lauderdale News, which was our paper back in the day, it's the Sun Sentinel now, right? It was the days of segregation. So when you find anything about African American people in the paper at that time, it's usually because they were in trouble with the law. And certainly no photos. However, I did find a few mentions to verify, yes, indeed, we had men in service. This is technician 5th grade Kermit Robinson, who's in Marianas. He was from Fort Lauderdale, as is James William, who was serving in the Persian Gulf. And Private Drain here is with an anti-aircraft outfit in Texas. He's from Liberia. That's the old black community in Hollywood. And to underscore this, I found this article from 46. It says, several hundred Negro veterans of Hollywood, Hallandale, and Dania, so that's just the south part of the county, are going to form a Legion post. So you know there's more. What I can say is our historical societies do not have photos. They are still in private hands, no doubt. Next slide. If most people would have a little service flag, they're kind of in vogue again, hanging in the window or on the door, and the blue star meant one of your family members was in service. This is Eva Oliver. All of her children were in service. Frank, her eldest, was killed in combat, and so instead of one blue star, she had a gold star representing him, and that was the origin of the Gold Star Mothers, which we still have today. Next. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit, briefly, about all our military installations here in the county. Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale was established at Merle Fogg Field. That was Fort Lauderdale's airport in 1942. You might know it better as the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. Next. It was a carrier-based bomber training base, okay? Carrier-based bomber, Avenger. Okay, TBF, TBM Avengers. Many of our veterans, we did, back when I was at Fort Lauderdale Historical, back in the 80s, I guess, we actually interviewed a lot of these veterans, and they all remembered with great amusement their arrival at the base and seeing on the control tower elevation 10 feet. Next slide. This is a hoot. So this is an Avenger parked in the middle of Hollywood Boulevard. And so my question is, how did it get there? Did they fly it in? Did they taxi all the way from the airport? I don't know. But it was probably there for a war bond drive or a parade. Now, next slide. Here we have another aerial view. We're looking northeast, so the ocean is up here. This is the Dania Cutoff Canal, you guys, so Griffin Road's right here. Now I want to read to you very briefly an excerpt. This is from this book is a narrative history of Fort Lauderdale, the Venice of America. So there's, of course, a whole chapter on World War II. I want to read you just a brief account from one of the veterans from the base. His name is Henry Torres. He was from Bell, California, and he was a turret gunner and mechanic. He arrives in 43 by train. On the south side of the field, there was about 4 or 5 barracks, a mess hall, and the aircrew lived there. To the east of us was the flight line, the ammunition shack, the hangar, the tower, and the wing shop. I remember we used to see all those buzzards over at the wing shop, and we'd say, what in the world are those buzzards doing over there? Well, they were picking pieces of body flesh off the airplanes that would fall and get wrecked here. And they would go out in a big old wagon, bring them back, and the birds would pick them clean. Now, there was a class every 2 or 3 months coming down here. My class alone, of the 45 of us that came down here, 15 were killed before we left in 2 months' time. A 30% mortality rate was considered acceptable for training at the time. This was a result of airplanes just, who cares, it's not in battle, and terrible maintenance, inadequate mechanics, and so on. So Bell credits a gentleman, Lieutenant Willie Mann, arrived as a security officer. He demanded better aircraft. He demanded better technicians. The mortality rate went down to 5%. Next slide. And today we have a more modern picture of the same spot. This is view looking west, but I use this one simply because you can see the Dania Cutoff there. Okay, next. One of the most famous graduates of Naval Air Fort Lauderdale is our future President, George Bush, and there you have him. Next. Now, I learned a new word doing this, NALF. It stands for Naval Outlying Landing Field. So these were basically runways, practice fields for the young men of NAS. Pompano Field, indeed, was a NALF. Next. As was Executive Airport, very proud of their World War II heritage. Next. Foreman Field, which today is home to Broward College. And this is actually Broward Junior College, which it was, that's what it was when we started, right? Being built right on the runways in the 60s. Next. North Perry Airport was a null for Opelika Naval Air. And as I said, my dad flew in and out of North Perry. That's on Pines Boulevard in Pembroke Pines. Next. Here are some naval airmen on parade on Andrews Avenue. There were parades all the time, military parades to show appreciation to the men in service, to drum up support for the war effort, to make everybody united and feel good, and also to help the war bond drive. Next. Here's another installation. The port becomes militarized during the war, and we had a Navy section base. It is a submarine chasing base. And let me read to you another brief account from my friend, Mr. Bob Lamb, who was a Miami native stationed at the base. Probably the most exciting day in Port Everglades history came in August of '42. A submarine wolf pack had been located off the coast, and every sub-fighting craft available was rushed to the scene. As the depth charges were expended, these ships raced back to Port E to restock from the section base's ammo dump. It was a dynamic day. As the lean, fierce destroyers stood by our dock to unload ash cans, those are depth charges, we felt at last that we were part of the war. Next slide. Now, thanks to Mr. Ed Dietrich, who I see in the back there, we know there were at least 2 vessels homeported at Port Everglades, the Tapacola and the Tarraco. I have no idea if I'm saying those correctly. One's a flower, one's a bird, I know that. They were minesweepers, but I know that they also were used to drag targets for naval air out in the ocean as well. Next. Thanks to the internet, for the glory of the internet for pictures, right? Now, this is Coast Guard Base 6. This photo was taken back in the 30s, but Coast Guard Base 6 was located where Bahia Mar is today. And of course, Coast Guard becomes militarized during the war as well. Coast Guard maintained a horseback patrol all the way up to Boynton Beach. The stables were at the Silver Thatch Inn in Lauderdale by the sea. And that is none other than R.L. Landers. I don't know if you all remember Helen Landers, who was our county historian forever and ever. And this is her hubby, who was a teacher and so on. And both of them have passed since. Next. We also had a home guard. There was a Florida Defense Guard to take the place of all the National Guardsmen who got sent over to service in Europe and in Japan, in the South Pacific, I mean. So this is the Fort Lauderdale Home Guard. Early in the war, they are on Andrews Avenue outside what was then our Fort Lauderdale City Hall, which was kind of where the government center is today, so opposite the library, and you can see they're doing gas mask drill. Next. Back to this, okay, I don't have a picture for the Coast Artillery, so this has to substitute. Coast Artillery was also set up all along our coast. We know where it was Coast Artillery near Coast Guard Base 6, and we know they had guns at what is now Birch State Park, and I'm quite certain they were elsewhere in the county, but I have never run into where. So if you all have any ideas, that would be good. There is one photo in the collection of Fort Lauderdale Historical. They are desperately looking for it for me, of the Coast Artillery guns here. But you know that was absolutely a vital part of coastal defense back in those days. Next. Now, our big hotels all over Florida were turned over to the military during the war. This is the Lauderdale Beach Hotel. She stands, at least part of her, proudly today, and the trade winds. Together, this whole complex became a mini military installation. It was a radar and range finding training school for the U.S. Navy. They fenced it off, fenced off the beach, so you couldn't drive A1A there. It was, a militarized zone. You had to drive around the west side of the island. Now, a lot of people who were there, who lived here during those times, will tell you, oh, we had no tourists. That's not true, interestingly. Fort Lauderdale has thousands of postcards in their collection, and I've looked at all of them. And a young lady named Jane Perry apparently was a tourist. She was staying at the Winholm Hotel, which stood at 321 North Atlantic Boulevard. And basically she wrote to her friends, everything is terribly crowded. Now remember, gas is rationed and so on, so it's very hard to get here. But apparently tourists, if you are determined to take a vacation, you can even in the middle of World War II. Okay, next. And the beautiful Hollywood Beach Hotel was home to a Naval Air Gunner School and indoctrination and training school. Next. And here's the brass at a graduation ceremony at NAGS. Next. Now, I mentioned Boca Raton Army Airfield because she's just up the road, and this was a very large base, one of the largest in our state, almost 6,000 acres. If you're familiar with Boca, it ran from Palmetto on the south to north of Yamato, from the FEC tracks on the east to the Amtrak tracks on the west. Many of you know that where FAU is today was the base. That was just the runways. So most of the buildings were to the east and south. Next. So all kinds of training programs were going on there, but the most important was airborne radar for the Army Air Forces. So during these years, it was the Army Air Forces, and the Air Force was under the Army still, only airborne radar training base in the country. As many as 50 to 100,000 men and women, we don't know, served here between 42 and 47 in a town of 750 people. That is why, you will see why that is relevant in a few slides. The main gate was at Palmetto Park Road and Northwest 4th Avenue. And Helen Landers told me she nearly ran into that gate on more than one occasion when she came up with her gal friends to go to dances. There were wonderful entertainments on the base from Fort Lauderdale. Next. We have several wartime industries. These are just in Fort Lauderdale. The HAK Corporation manufactured dummy projectile shells. Dooley's Basin and Dry Dock, which became Broward Marine, made minesweepers. Here's one of them. It is going through the bridge on New River at Federal Highway, which is now a tunnel. This is the Stranahan House. Recognize this? Okay. Gate City Lumber was this huge old lumber yard west of the FEC tracks, north of Broward Boulevard, no, south of Broward Boulevard. They made what we call Gate City windows. So they're awning style, not jealousy, but awning style windows, but with wood frames. And Fort Lauderdale people call that Gate City windows, okay? They were used all over the world in military installations, particularly the tropics in the South Pacific, because that's what they were built for. Rex Bassett and Florida Aircraft Radio Corp made electronics for aircraft radios, and even little shops like Dale Redmond's tackle shop. He had a lathe, and he was engaged to produce wartime items. I don't even know what. And a lot of that was to get local businesses involved in the war effort. They may not even been doing anything very practical, but they certainly thought they were. Next. This was a liberating time for women. All over. Here are some wax. I don't know if the wax are from the Boca Raton Army Airfield. There were quite a few of them. Here they are on parade, once again, Andrews Avenue in that 1943 parade. We also had women Army nurses, and they're standing outside the base hospital in Boca Raton, which is not very far from where our modern hospital is today. Next. We also had waves, because this was a Navy county, right? Waves specialists who were gunnery trainers at NAGS, at the Naval Air Gunnery School in Hollywood. Most of these women had degrees in mathematics and engineering and stuff like that. They really knew what they were doing. They were not allowed in combat. They were not allowed in the South Pacific, but they did train the guys in Hollywood. Next. A lot of jobs are now open because men are in service, and so there are wartime jobs for women. Here's Miss Eldra Durham. She was a postal clerk at Boca Raton Field, originally from Fort Lauderdale. Both her husband and she worked in the post office at the base, which was real important, obviously. They worked 12-hour shifts, and of course it was blackout conditions, and there was no interstate. So it was quite a commute. So they actually moved to Boca Raton briefly. I don't know how they found a place to live, but they did. Very interesting. So that was one of many examples of that. Next. My friend Marion Forty, who is part of the Hollywood Historical Society, worked in the ship service at the Hollywood Beach Hotel. Next. Now, this is another civilian agency, and it's very interesting. I bet you've all heard about the plane spotters in your town. It was the Aircraft Warning Service. This was the civilian service. Every coastal community would have a tower. In our case, in Boca Raton, it was kind of where Red Reef is today, just a tower special built. In Fort Lauderdale, it was the top of the suite building. In Hollywood, it was at Dania Beach Boulevard and the beach. Where was it here? Do we know? Where was the spotting tower here? I know you had one.
Wasn't it in Boca?
Well, there's one in every town. There's one in every town, so there was one in Deerfield somewhere. But I can tell you in Oakland Park, we had a spotting tower. It was the top of someone's garage down the street from my house, okay? So I'm not sure they were doing any good, but that was their job, okay? And it's very cool. So their job was to report any aircraft in daylight hours, any aircraft flying overhead. There was a phone line directly to Miami. Next. Now, in order to qualify for AWS, you had to memorize, you had to pass the test, you had to memorize the silhouettes of Axis and Allied aircraft. So it's kind of hard. But what's cool is you could be any age and any gender. So our friend Peter and his mom manned the aircraft, manned the spotting tower. Can you imagine what an awesome job that was for like a 10-year-old guy? Oh my God, perfect job. Okay, next. Now, my friend Eldra, she was a spotter. I don't know when she fit that into her life, but she did, in Fort Lauderdale. And she recounted one time, Miami headquarters decided to play a little trick on the spotters to test them. And what they did was they sent a captured German aircraft up the coast to see who would spot it. And the aircraft they sent is this. A Blumenbach BB-141, a very unusual aircraft, as you can see. The silhouette looks like it's missing an engine. So it's quite distinctive and very recognizable. And Eldra was very proud because she spotted it. Okay, next. Now, a lot of officers' wives in town, particularly Boca Raton, who are bored out of their ever-loving minds because there's no internet, there's no TV, and you can't go anywhere because there's no gas. The Red Cross became a really important outlet for this. And not only did they knit socks and bandage each other's high heels, I love that photograph, but the Red Cross, we know today, it steps in and helps people out when they've had a disaster. But according to our Boca Raton Field-based newspaper, the Red Cross really acted as a local welfare agency. And they would give funds to, say, young soldiers who had a new wife and a new baby in tow and very small wages. In order to get money for these funds, the officers' wives and anybody, men were also involved in the Red Cross, of course, would have fancy luncheons, entertainments, bake sales, whatever they could do. So that kept them very busy doing fundraising for, specifically for the boys here on the home front. Next. War bonds, it was your patriotic duty to buy them. It was your patriotic duty to sell them. Here is the crew under the Honor Arch on Hollywood Boulevard, a Hollywood crowd. This is our Fort Lauderdale crew, and this young lady is a Bond belle. Of course, she's now selling. And people young and old campaign for war bonds. Next. This is cool. Fort Lauderdale Women's Club contributed enough war bond funds that they had a P-51 Mustang named after them. That's pretty hot stuff. Next. Now, my mom remembers this. Youngsters would go and collect metal for the war effort. Now she said, Sue, I'm pretty sure nothing we collected was actually usable, but we didn't know that. We thought we were doing, number one, it's the scavenger hunt. What fun, right? A lot of tetanus involved, I would imagine, right? But it was a lot of fun, but they thought they were doing their patriotic duty. Okay, next. And in Hollywood, the Boy Scouts collected rubber to rub out the Axis for the same reason. So this is an ad that appeared in the paper soliciting people to contribute salvage rubber for the war effort. Next. Now, World War II is one of those times, like the pandemic, when every single American citizen is impacted by a specific event or phenomenon. There aren't too many of those in world history, but that was one. Because even if you weren't in service or your family members weren't, you were subject to rationing. A lot of things were limited because they were going to the war effort, like fuel and so on. But many things like sugar were limited because of the limits on imports. Now we know what that's like right now anyway, don't we? Okay? Because we don't want to waste ships on bringing in sugar when they could be, supplying the Allies overseas. Next. This is my mom's war ration book. She's a Miami girl. War ration book 3. And so what happened is you would have to pay cash. The prices were theoretically overseen by the Office of Price Administration. It was called the OPA, to avoid the black market and gouging, okay? In theory, right? So you had to pay for the item. You had to cough up whatever number of ration stamps. And in change, you would get these little cardboard tokens. They're called OPA tokens in lieu of actual change. We know, according to the Fort Lauderdale News, in '43, bacon, 1 pound is 30 cents and requires 7 ration stamps. You better want that. Ketchup, which is full of sugar, right? 14 ounces is 15 cents and 8 ration points. Sugar, 1 pound is 5.5 cents. I don't know where that's coming from. With ration stamp number 12, good for up to 5 pounds. That was from an ad I found in the paper. And this ration coupon is for a bakery. Obviously, they needed sugar and flour more than average people. Next. Everyone is encouraged, and they do grow Victory Garden. That's very easy to do in your backyard or side yard in this part of the world. The boys at the Boca Raton Army Airfield had big Victory Gardens up there north of Yamato in Boca Raton. And the whole idea was to try and mitigate your reliance on store-bought goods. Everyone was encouraged to can and preserve like their mothers and grandmothers had. So it was very practical reasons. And grow your own food as much as possible. Next. Now fuel is rationed, coal is rationed, rubber is rationed. Everyone is encouraged to carpool. In West Palm Beach, the Red Cross had an Uber service. And I bet there was one in Fort Lauderdale too. So it's very civilized. So if you had to go to the doctor or something like that, rather than wasting your fuel and rubber, you would call up and they would bring you to your appointment. I mean, it was really a great idea. Also, of course, it was hard to travel. The trains and buses were very, very crowded with servicemen. My mom remembers you would stand up, if you were on the bus, you stood up for a serviceman to have your seat, even if you were a lady. Okay, next. And of course, you were encouraged to preserve your clothes, recycle. You had 3 shoe rations a year. Now, my mom's a teenager in Miami. This was horrible. Okay. So one of the pairs, oh my goodness. One of the pairs of shoes she had to buy were black lace-up Oxfords because she was in the marching band. Now today, black lace-up Oxfords, I'm just so FYI, is cool and goth, okay? But in 1943, 44, they were not cool and goth, they were just ugly. And they meant you couldn't have real shoes, right? But she told me these huaraches, ladies know what huaraches are. They're from Mexico. They're sandals made with little leather strips, were not rationed. And Capezio-style ballet slippers, which were cloth with like a cardboard, okay, were not rationed. So they became real fashionable. And of course, nylon was rationed. So ladies would do goofy stuff like paint their legs, kind of like spray on tan, right? Or take an eyebrow pencil and put a line up the back of their leg, because back then stockings still had a seam in them. Very creative. Next. Now everybody was under blackout conditions, and what this meant is that all our coastal communities, you had to black out the lights from your house or business at night. And this is because if you did shine lights, you could silhouette those ships at sea, and now they're an even easier target for the U-boats. Next. So people would put blackout curtains up, cardboard, plywood, whatever you had to do. The Fort Lauderdale Historical Society, one of my favorite collection items, are the blackout curtains from the Women's Club, because the clubhouse built back in the teens, and they never cleaned out the closets until 2000, okay? Good for them. And they said, what are these? I said, well, I'm pretty sure I know what those are. And those blackout curtains have been on tour throughout the state of Florida with the World War II exhibit. Isn't that hilarious? Anyway, also, when you went outside, number one, there were curfews on. So what are you doing outside in a car anyway? But if you did, you had to black out at least the top of your car headlights, so they would just shine down. And of course, there were no street lights, so it was very, very dangerous to drive around at night anyway. And of course, air raid sirens become a terrifying way of life for everybody. Next. So a real issue, particularly at the Boca Raton field, is where the heck are we, the civilians and the families of these servicemen, going to live? So this is a wonderful ad I have from the Ocean Beach Association, and it has boarding houses and motels, and you know, it was a lot less developed than it is today, from Boynton all the way to Pompano, and certainly in Fort Lauderdale too, where you could stay. Everybody opened their homes if they had a spare room to servicemen and women, or civilian employees as well. Next. Here's a couple of my favorite couples. Bill Edinger was a radar instructor at Boca Raton Field, and he brought his wife Phoebe and little daughter Patty to work at Boca Raton Field. They needed a place to live. They lived in Victoria Park in Fort Lauderdale and commuted at least for a couple of years. Now that's a kind of a big commute now. It was terrible then. So eventually they find a home in Boca Raton, and they remained there their whole life. Patty was my research assistant for many years. They're all gone now. Next. Now this is cool. So this is the Bryan House at the Fort Lauderdale Historical Society, built in the early 20th century. And a family lived there during the war. It's not really a big house. It looks big to me because it's two-story. There's just a couple of bedrooms upstairs. During the war, 15 women, in addition to the family, boarded at the house. They worked swing shift at the port. So they'd sleep in shifts. And you would put up the cardboard to try and create a little privacy for people. The kitchen, which isn't very big, was turning all the time. Now, this is cool. So they had room for a hen house, and they had chickens and eggs, okay? Good. The Bryan House happens to be directly across the railroad tracks, the Florida East Coast tracks, from what was then the Fort Lauderdale Florida East Coast Railway Depot Station. And hundreds of young men are arriving there every day to serve at the various installations. So the young ladies collected those eggs, and they made bazillions of egg salad sandwiches and sold them for 5 cents to the guys who are starving because they've been on the train for 12 hours with nothing to eat, and they did very well for themselves. So resourceful. Next. The hottest place in the county is the Fort Lauderdale Servicemen's Center. It was on Las Olas, on the south side of the street at about what is now Southeast 2nd Avenue. So not 3rd Avenue, not Andrews, just east of Bouvier or DDA Plaza, whatever we call it today. It keeps changing names. It was a wonderful place. At any time you would have this wonderful professional musicians from the various bands, from the various installations playing swing music, of course. There were dances, there was a soda fountain, there was a library, there were pool table billiards, and most importantly, young men could come and meet nice young ladies to dance with and get to know, and also like the Fort Lauderdale Women's Club, who were older ladies at the time. They would man the counter. You'd have a female to talk to, so this was a really important place. Next. Now, it was the days of segregation, so no black soldiers are allowed there, but there was a Negro Service Club at Northwest 2nd Street and 5th Avenue, so north of Broward Boulevard, like 2 blocks east of 7th there. You know, that's where the performing arts is. Okay, and they were given funds by the chamber and so on. And once again, I was a little skeptical because I'd never read about black soldiers stationed in Broward. But this gentleman he's a sailor, Arthur Kelly. So there were African American sailors, probably at Naval Air Station, but maybe at Section Base as well. Next. In Hollywood, the country club, which is where the country club is today, but it had this beautiful old country club facility. It was taken over as the officers club, and apparently it was extremely swanky. Next. Now, if you love stories, okay, you got to forgive me because it is a sentimental journey, right? Okay. So here we have Helen Harriet of Fort Lauderdale, R.L. Landers, and they are on the beach at Bonnet House, which was and is technically a private beach, by the way, not open to the public. So that was very daring, she said, okay? And she can't remember the name of their other friends, but they were married, what, almost 70 years or something like that. Next. Couple of more, another favorite couple. This is Private Archie Carswell. He's from Georgia. And he was stationed at Boca Raton Field. So his barracks mate one time says, I'm going over to Pearl City to see my cousin. You want to come? Where's that, Pearl City? Well, it was really not too long of a walk from the base. And they get there and they end up in the house of this young lady, Irene Demering. And Archie says, Irene's sick in bed. So he and his friends, they say, we're going to go down the block to the juke joint, okay? The 40s version of a nightclub. All right. So according to Archie, Irene's up like a shot. Now she's not sick anymore. And they were married 67, 68 years, something like that, Sally. Here they are in 2006. They were our friends, Sally and me. We were very, very fond of them. They were part of a group. We had to try and preserve the memory of the Boca Raton Field. Not only, that's Archie in his uniform, in a World War II building, which burned down, by the way, it was hit with lightning. Irene worked at the base PX. So she's a veteran of the base too. And she too, I'm pretty sure she could wear that dress too. And during those segregation days, Archie says everything was segregated. Not only the barracks and the mess halls, even the post had 2 movie theaters. White movie theater, black movie theater. It was ridiculous. But that's the way things were back then. Next. This is Lieutenant Manny Chavez. He is a pilot from Las Cruces, New Mexico. And he very quickly meets a beautiful young nurse, Lieutenant, by the way, Bernice Butler. And they were married at the base chapel and had a baby in the base hospital. And she is our friend. She still lives in Miami. And unfortunately, these folks are all gone now. Next. War ends, 1945. Boca Raton Field continues operations until 47. And as a matter of fact, then it became, most of the operations and personnel moved to Biloxi, to Keesler Field. However, it became a Boca Raton Auxiliary Air Force base and continued operations greatly reduced until 59. The Naval Air Station continued operations until 46. Next. And a little denouement to our story. I'm sure you're all aware in December of 45, 5 TBM Avengers, and 1 PBM, that's a flying boat, flying death trap, I understand. Were on a training mission off Fort Lauderdale. They have yet to return. The famous Flight 19 of the so-called Devil's Triangle, we may never know what happened to them. There is a monument at the airport, and every year, I think it's the 6th, the 5th, okay, every year they have a ceremony dedicated to the memory of all those who were lost in that flight. Next. And a shout out to my buddies at Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale Historical Museum. You drive right back of this when you're on the interstate coming north. You can see it. It's right next to the animal control near the tower. That is one of the original, the only building that survives from the base. It's called the Link Trainer Building, named for Mr. Link. Took me many years to figure that out. And the Link Trainer is kind of like flight simulator. It's how pilots learn how to fly. Today, it's a lovely little museum dedicated to World War II and to Naval Air Fort Lauderdale. Next. And last, almost last, these are my publications. I have some on offer here today. This Venice of America has a chapter on World War II. There are, don't worry, Dad, there are photos in the middle. Images of America, which you can get online. There's a whole chapter on the 40s, as in Fort Lauderdale and vintage postcards. In Broward County, the photography of Gene Hyde, I have a number of his photos of that famous Arauca incident. They're really wonderful. And then I just recently published this, well, actually it's been several years, Palm Beach County during World War II. With my buddies at the Historical Society of Palm Beach County. So almost half the book are photos of Boca Raton, and not just the chapter on the Boca Raton field. As a matter of fact, those are wax from our base on the cover. Right now, I am working on a history of Oakland Park. Next. So I wanted Amy Kay, I think somebody asked me to show a little bit about our new exhibits. I hope you will visit. We're opening officially November 3rd. That's when we're open to the public at Boca Raton Town Hall. Next. So what I did was I included a couple of slides of the new World War II room. So we have a whole gallery dedicated to Boca Raton during the war. There's actually a film that shows up here like a dogfight. So it's animated. There's a lot of sound. This is a mock radar receiver. There's a film I found that shows how airborne radar works. It's actually from the military. I got it online. It's just amazing, right? This is the section about the U-boats. There's our famous coffee can and so on. Over here we have audio components. We have wonderful memories from some of the people you met in this. Civilians, military men and women about Boca Raton during the war in their own words. Next. Hanging from the ceiling is a scale model B17. We named her the Boca Belle. You have to have nose art. The nose art was actually created by Zach Mosley, creator of Smilin' Jack, which was the most popular comic in America in the 40s and 30s. And he was Civil Air Patrol. And was in Coastal Patrol, so he knew the guys at the Boca base, and he drew the girly girl for them. Next. And there's a close-up of the section about the U-boats, which must have been an absolutely terrifying time. Next. And that's it. So you all stayed awake very well. I was paying attention. Is there a question you think I can answer?
Can I have 3 minutes?
Go ahead.
Put a cherry on your whipped cream on that beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
My name's Edinger, but
Go up front, Ed. Come on.
no, I'm fine.
All right.
All right. Floating around here, there's a little photograph right there. That's an aerial photo from 1942
Okay.
of the Pier Number 2 at the section base.
Okay.
My father was an engineering officer on the Tapacola. And
Okay.
you did pronounce it correctly.
Oh, good, good.
Congratulations. Then executive officer, then he went to the Toronto,
Toronto,
same class as
right.
Flip. He was the XO there. Then that was his first ship command, CO. His commanding officer, Allard Hayward, was not only his commanding officer, but a good friend and a mentor. Allard was commanding officer of the USS Tide at Normandy, and on 7 June 1944, his ship detonated a German mine, and the ship sank, and he was killed. So that was a very sad day for my dad. But anyway, that was the start. And then somewhere along the line, the Navy said, we think we should send you to go fight the Japanese instead of the Germans. So
Yeah.
that was the first
Wow.
of his
Okay.
2 deployments to the
Right,
Pacific.
right.
Here, you talked about ladies helping out. There's a picture of my mother
All right.
working with Easter Gates.
Easter Lily Gates, okay.
Easter Lily Gates, you know, if you know anything about Fort Lauderdale, you know about Easter Lily Gates, the wonderful matriarch.
Yes,
So
she's
that-
our
That's from the
supervisor of elections forever and ever.
Fort Lauderdale.
Show the camera.
There you go.
No, turn it.
Oh, this way.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, vertical. So, Fort Lauderdale News, April 26, 1942.
And where are they working?
They are, I'm not sure exactly where they are.
Okay.
You talked about Gate City Lumber and building.
Nutrition classes.
Building windows. If you go to Florida Atlantic, the old buildings that are there, the T buildings, you will find the original Gate City windows
Yes.
in those the
Yeah.
surviving buildings.
Yes.
I think there's 2.
Four, there's
Is there
4. There's
Yep.
4 on campus.
Yep, exactly.
But there's about 15 in all. So there are others that survive. Sally and I go like every couple of years to see what's still standing, you know? But yeah, very cool.
Exactly. So, and
Awesome.
one last thing I will present to you.
Yeah.
This is it says U.S. Atlantic Fleet
Okay.
because they still had old stationery from my
Yeah.
dad's 2nd or 3rd
That's
ship
fun.
command.
That's fun.
This is from 14 August 1945 from the commanding officer or commander-in-chief Pacific Fleet. It says cease present offensive operation against Japanese forces.
that.
Stop. Continue searches and patrols. Stop. Maintain defensive and internal security measures at highest level and beware of treachery or last moment attacks by enemy forces or individuals. Secret operational priority. Boom.
Very
And watch out for Sue Gillis because she could attack you at any moment.
That's right.
No,
That's
just
right.
kidding.
Oh,
So-
that is awesome, Ed.
So-
Thank you so much.
Enjoy. Oh, and one last thing, you mentioned rubber was rationed.
Yes.
I think it was on the Tarraco, they're out on patrol out here, chasing the Germans around. They see this big white blob, about quarter the size of this space here. Back then, raw rubber was imported from South America because we hadn't really gotten totally engaged with synthetic rubber. And so they found this thing, this cargo ship had been torpedoed, sunk, all of its rubber, boom, floated around, who knows where it all ended up. He was able to grab a hold of that. They got in touch with the Goodyear company and said, we have a big blob of rubber, would you like to buy it? And he got permission from the Navy to sell it to Goodyear, who then sent them a check, and they put it in the ship's welfare
Well,
fund.
I've got to tell you, an adjunct to that. So our friend Peter, guess what floated ashore at their house? Big blob of rubber.
There you go.
Balata, they called it.
Yeah,
And they
balata.
sold it for money, Granddad sold it for money to the government. I bet it's the same cargo ship.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So-
what a hoot.
So, thanks for letting me contribute.
Yes, thank you, Ed. Anybody else?
I would just like to say, everyone, to say, wait just a minute, I have to walk all the way up here.
Oh, my goodness.
Just make a note, November 20th, that gentleman is going to be sharing more information about, in honor of Veterans Day. We can't let that go by without thinking. A lot went before to give us what we have. And Eddie's going to be speaking and sharing about some locals that were involved in the...
Oh, great.
So y'all make your calendar. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.